Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The world of 1960 was a world hurtling forward, a world of new alliances, new technologies, and a new generation eager to leave the smoking ruins of the past behind. In the suburbs of Buenos Aires, Argentina, life was particularly placid. On a modest, unpaved lane named Garibaldi Street, in the district of San Fernando, lived a man who seemed to embody this forward-looking mundanity. His name was Ricardo Klement. He was a foreman at a Mercedes-Benz factory, a quiet man of middle age with thinning hair and glasses. He lived in a simple brick house he had built himself, a house without electricity or running water. Every morning he would walk to the bus stop. Every evening he would return. His neighbors knew him as a quiet, unassuming German immigrant, perhaps a bit stern, but ultimately harmless, a man lost in the crowd. But Ricardo Klement was a ghost. His name was a fiction, his life a carefully constructed lie. And beneath the drab exterior of the factory foreman was a past so monstrous it defied comprehension. For Ricardo Klement was, in fact, SS Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann. He was not a soldier who had fought on the front lines, nor a camp guard who had personally committed acts of brutality. He was something far more modern and far more terrifying. He was the administrator of genocide, the logistical mastermind of the final solution, the man who, from a desk in Berlin, organized the transportation schedules, the train timetables, and the industrial efficiency that sent millions of men, women, and children to their deaths in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. He was the chief operating officer of the Holocaust, and for 15 years he had simply vanished. This is not a story about a simple crime. It is a story about a crime against humanity itself, and the long, patient, and perilous quest to hold one of its chief architects accountable. It is a story that asks a profound question. How does a man responsible for the murder of 6 million people simply disappear into the fabric of everyday life? And what does it take to pull him back from oblivion when the world has already begun to forget? Today, we dissect the anatomy of a global manhunt. We will examine the meticulous intelligence, the moral courage, and the sheer audacity of the secret agents who crossed the globe to find one man. This is the story of how a handful of determined individuals, haunted by the ghosts of the past, tracked a specter to a humble brick house on Garibaldi Street and staged one of the most daring intelligence operations in history to remind the world that some crimes can never be forgiven and some men can never be allowed to disappear. Adolf Eichmann was not born a monster. He was manufactured by an ideology. Born in Solingen, Germany, in 1906, his early life was unremarkable. He was a mediocre student, a failed engineer, who eventually found work as a traveling salesman for an oil company in Austria. He was, by all accounts, a man of average intelligence and little charisma, a drifter in search of a purpose. In 1932, he found that purpose when he joined the Austrian Nazi Party. Here, in the rigid hierarchy and grand, violent vision of National Socialism, the aimless salesman found a home. He was efficient, organized, and, most importantly, completely and utterly dedicated to the cause. He didn't possess the rabid, street-brawling fanaticism of some of his peers. His was a colder, more methodical devotion. He was a bureaucrat. His rise within the SS was steady. He found his niche in the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, the intelligence agency of the party. His focus became the Jewish question. Initially, his department, Section IVB4, was responsible for promoting Jewish emigration. Forcibly, of course. He became an expert on what he saw as the logistics of his enemy, studying Jewish culture and even learning rudimentary Hebrew and Yiddish, the better to understand and dismantle their communities. But with the outbreak of war and the radicalization of Nazi policy, his mission shifted from forced emigration to systematic extermination. He was the man who made the trains run on time. From his office in Berlin, he coordinated with Nazi authorities across occupied Europe, meticulously arranging the mass deportations of Jewish populations to the newly constructed death camps in Poland. He was the quintessential desk murderer. He may not have personally pulled a trigger or released the Zyklon B gas, but his signature on a memorandum, his entry in a ledger, his adjustment to a train schedule, was a death sentence for thousands. He attended the infamous Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the final solution was formalized, taking the minutes and ensuring the other arms of the German state understood their roles in the machinery of murder. He pursued this work with a chilling, passionless zeal. When the Hungarian government, late in the war, began to waver in its cooperation, Eichmann personally went to Budapest to oversee the deportation of nearly 500,000 Hungarian Jews in a matter of weeks, a feat of logistical horror he later recalled with pride. This was his contribution to the Third Reich, the transformation of mass murder into a matter of administrative problem-solving. When the Third Reich crumbled in the spring of 1945, Eichmann, like thousands of other SS men, knew he was a marked man. He was captured by American forces but managed to conceal his true identity, posing as a low-level Luftwaffe officer named Otto Eckmann. The name was close, but not close enough to raise immediate flags in the chaos of post-war Germany. He was placed in a prisoner-of-war camp, but the name Adolf Eichmann was already on the lips of prosecutors preparing for the Nuremberg trials. He was a major war criminal, and he knew it. In early 1946, before his identity could be confirmed, he escaped. For the next 4 years, he lived a phantom existence, moving between different safe houses and working various odd jobs in Germany, always under an assumed name, always looking over his shoulder. His escape to a new life was facilitated by what would become known as the ratlines. While popular culture often imagines a monolithic, all-powerful SS organization called Odessa spiriting Nazis to safety, the reality was a looser, more chaotic network. It was a web of sympathetic clergy, particularly within the Catholic Church, and corrupt officials who, for reasons of ideology or greed, helped wanted men obtain false papers and passage out of Europe. A key figure in Eichmann's escape was a pro-Nazi Austrian bishop named Alois Hudal, who ran a network out of Rome. In 1950, with Hudal's help, Eichmann obtained a Red Cross passport, a document of statelessness, under the name Ricardo Klement, a supposed mechanic born in the Italian South Tyrol. With this new identity, he boarded a ship in Genoa and sailed for Argentina, a country under the rule of Juan Perón, which had become a sanctuary for former Nazis. He arrived in Buenos Aires on July 14, 1950, a free man. For the next decade, Adolf Eichmann was dead, and Ricardo Klement began his quiet, unremarkable new life. While Eichmann settled into his anonymous existence in Argentina, building a new family life, his wife Vera and sons eventually joined him. The world was trying to reckon with the scale of his crimes. His name had been mentioned repeatedly at the Nuremberg trials. Survivors spoke of the cold, efficient man who had sealed their family's fates. But the man himself was gone. In the early years, the hunt was fragmented. The Allied powers were focused on rebuilding Europe and confronting a new Cold War with the Soviet Union. Nazi hunting was not a top priority. The task fell to a handful of determined, often isolated individuals who refused to let the world forget. The most famous of these was Simon Wiesenthal, a survivor of the Mauthausen concentration camp who dedicated his life to tracking down Nazi war criminals. He gathered testimony, built files, and tirelessly lobbied governments to pursue justice. Wiesenthal followed leads on Eichmann across the world, at times believing him to be in Egypt, at others in Syria. While many of his specific leads proved to be dead ends, his relentless work was crucial. He kept Eichmann's name alive, ensuring that the architect of the final solution did not simply fade into a historical footnote. He was a moral compass, a constant reminder that the ledgers of justice were not yet balanced. But the crucial breakthrough would come not from a famous Nazi hunter, but from a German prosecutor operating from within a system that was often reluctant to confront its own past. His name was Dr. Fritz Bauer. Bauer was a secular Jew and a social democrat who had been arrested by the Nazis in 1933 and spent time in a concentration camp before fleeing to Denmark. He returned to Germany after the war, determined to build a new democratic legal system on the ashes of the Third Reich. By 1956, he was the Attorney General for the state of Hesse, based in Frankfurt. Bauer was a man possessed by a cold, righteous fury. He was disgusted by the presence of so many former Nazis in the new West German government, police forces, and judiciary. He saw it as his mission to force Germany to confront its own history through the legal process. In 1957, Fritz Bauer received a letter from a man in Argentina. The man's name was Lothar Hermann. Hermann was a German Jew who had also fled the Nazis and settled in Buenos Aires. He was blind, a result of his brutal treatment in the Dachau concentration camp. The letter contained an almost unbelievable claim. Hermann's teenage daughter, Sylvia, had recently started dating a young man named Klaus Eichmann. The young man was boastful and unrepentant about his family's Nazi past. He openly praised his father's actions during the war and told Sylvia it was a pity that Germany hadn't managed to finish the job of exterminating the Jews. Lothar Hermann, piecing together the boasts of this young man, came to a terrifying suspicion. He believed his daughter's boyfriend was the son of Adolf Eichmann, and that the architect of the Holocaust was living nearby. Hermann sent his findings to Fritz Bauer in Germany. Bauer was electrified, but he faced a grave dilemma. He knew with absolute certainty that he could not trust his own country's authorities. If he handed the information over to the German police or intelligence services, it would almost certainly be leaked by Nazi sympathizers still embedded in the system, and Eichmann would vanish once again. Bauer was about to make a decision that, by the letter of German law, constituted treason. He decided to bypass his own government entirely and deliver the information to the one country he knew would act on it without reservation, the State of Israel. In 1957, he arranged a secret meeting with an Israeli official in Brussels and passed on everything he knew about Ricardo Klement. He did so at immense personal risk, guided by a higher loyalty. As he later said, "When I leave my office, I am no longer a government official. I am my conscience." The information from Fritz Bauer landed on the desk of one of the most formidable and secretive men in Israel, Isser Harel, the director of the Mossad. Harel was a legend in the world of intelligence. Short in stature, he was known as Isser Hakatan, or Little Isser, but his influence was immense. He was a spy master of the old school, ruthless, paranoid, meticulous, and utterly devoted to the security of the Jewish state. For Harel, the Holocaust was not a distant historical event. It was a foundational trauma, the driving force behind Israel's very existence, the idea that one of its chief architects was living freely in South America was an intolerable offense, a wound that could not be allowed to fester. Yet the initial Mossad operation based on Bauer's tip was a failure. In 1958, agents were dispatched to Buenos Aires to verify Lothar Hermann's information. The intelligence was imperfect. The address they had was for a property Eichmann had previously rented. When the agents arrived, they found a different family living there. The house was a dilapidated shack, and the agents, perhaps expecting a high-ranking Nazi to be living in luxury, couldn't believe this could be the place. They concluded the tip was bad and recommended closing the file. For a time, the trail went cold once more, a frustrating near miss in the long hunt. Lothar Hermann, for his part, tried to profit from his information, demanding payment from Israeli authorities, which further damaged his credibility in their eyes. But Fritz Bauer was persistent. He didn't let the matter drop. He maintained contact with Hermann and gathered more corroborating evidence. By late 1959, he had new intelligence confirming that Eichmann was indeed in Argentina. Though he had moved, he again contacted his Israeli counterparts, urging them to look again. This time, Harel was convinced. The political climate had also shifted. There was a rising tide of neo-Nazi incidents in West Germany and elsewhere, and Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion felt the time was right to make a powerful statement. He gave Isser Harel the green light for a full-scale operation to find and capture Adolf Eichmann and bring him to Israel to stand trial. The mission was codenamed Operation Finale. Harel began to assemble his team. This would not be a typical intelligence mission. It required a unique blend of skills. He needed spies, forgers, pilots, and commandos. He needed people who could blend into a foreign country, conduct painstaking surveillance, and, when the time came, execute a kidnapping on foreign soil with ruthless efficiency. The team he chose was a reflection of the young state of Israel itself. Many were Holocaust survivors, or the children of survivors, for whom this mission was deeply personal. The operational leader was Rafi Eaton, a tough, resourceful kibbutznik and veteran intelligence officer. The man chosen to lead the on-the-ground investigation and interrogation was Zvi Aharoni, a German-born interrogator whose family had fled the Nazis in the 1930s. His fluent, unaccented German would be invaluable, and for the physical capture itself, Harel chose Peter Malkin, a physically powerful agent known for his artistic temperament and his expertise in disguise and unarmed combat. His sister and her children had been murdered in the Holocaust. For Malkin, this was not just a mission, it was a reckoning. In early 1960, the Mossad team began to filter into Argentina, traveling under various false passports and posing as businessmen and tourists. Their first task was to find their man. They had a name, Ricardo Klement, but no firm address. They knew his son, Klaus, was still in Buenos Aires. The team put Klaus under surveillance, painstakingly tracking his movements, his friends, his routines. They followed him to a bus stop on the outskirts of the city, and then shadowed him on a long ride into a remote, underdeveloped suburb. They watched as he got off the bus and walked down a dirt road. And there, at the end of the road, was a humble, isolated brick house on the corner of Garibaldi Street. The house was modest, almost a shack. There was no fence, no electricity line running to the property. It was a far cry from the opulent villa some might have imagined for a Nazi mastermind. The team set up a covert observation post and began the slow, tedious work of surveillance. For weeks, they watched the house, documenting the comings and goings of the family. They saw a woman, Vera Eichmann, and several young sons. And they saw a balding, bespectacled man in his 50s who left for work at the same time every morning and returned on the bus at the same time every evening. His routine was clockwork. He looked like the picture of banal domesticity. Could this truly be the man who had managed the logistics for the murder of millions? They needed absolute confirmation. A mistaken identity would be a disaster of epic proportions, both diplomatically and for the reputation of the Mossad. Zvi Aharoni, the lead investigator, devised a plan. Hiding a camera inside a briefcase with a hole cut for the lens, he sat at a bus stop, waiting for his target. As the man walked past, Aharoni snapped a series of pictures. The film was secretly sent back to Israel. In a secure lab, forensic experts compared the photograph of Ricardo Klement's left ear with a clear photograph from Adolf Eichmann's official SS file. The anatomical details of the ear, as unique as a fingerprint, were a perfect match. They had their man. But Isser Harel, ever the perfectionist, wanted one more piece of proof. He ordered the team to find something that would link this man, Ricardo Klement, directly to the known life of Adolf Eichmann. The team dug through old records and discovered the date of Adolf and Vera Eichmann's wedding anniversary, March 21st. On the evening of March 21st, 1960, the Mossad surveillance team watched Garibaldi Street with bated breath. They saw Ricardo Klement return from work, but this time he was carrying a bouquet of flowers. He entered the house, and later the agents observed through the window a small, festive gathering inside. A man celebrating his 25th wedding anniversary on the exact date that Adolf Eichmann had married his wife, Vera. This was the final, irrefutable proof. The ghost had a face, a name, and an address. Now they had to plan the capture. The plan for the abduction was a model of operational precision, but it was fraught with risk. They were operating on foreign soil, without the knowledge or permission of the Argentinian government. If anything went wrong, it would trigger a massive international incident. They could not use firearms. The risk of a shootout was too great. The capture had to be swift, silent, and clean. The team studied Eichmann's routine in minute detail. They knew which bus he took home, what time it usually arrived, and the path he walked from the bus stop to his front door. This short, isolated walk was his moment of vulnerability. The date was set for May 11, 1960. The plan was for 2 cars to be positioned near the bus stop. One car, the snatch car, would directly intercept Eichmann. The other would act as a backup and a lookout. The team rehearsed the plan over and over. They timed the walk. They war-gamed every possible contingency. What if he took an earlier bus? What if he was with someone? What if he fought back? Rafi Eaton, the operation commander, gave his team their final instructions. He stressed that Eichmann was to be taken alive and unharmed. He was not to be a martyr. He was to be a defendant. As dusk fell on May 11th, the Mossad team moved into position. The air was thick with tension. The agents, sitting in their parked cars, watched the minutes tick by. Eichmann's bus was due around 7:40 p.m. They saw the headlights approach in the distance. The bus slowed, stopped, and then pulled away. Eichmann wasn't on it. A wave of anxiety washed over the team. Had he changed his routine? Had he been tipped off? Their entire meticulously planned operation was suddenly in jeopardy. They waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then another bus appeared. It stopped, and this time a single man got off. It was him. Eichmann began his short walk home, one hand in his pocket. The snatch car, its engine running silently, slowly pulled out to block his path. Peter Malkin got out. As Eichmann drew near, Malkin spoke to him in Spanish, a language he barely knew. Un momentito, senor. A little moment, sir. Eichmann, startled, looked at him. In that instant, Malkin lunged, grabbing him, and forcing him into a headlock. Eichmann let out a terrifying, inhuman shriek, like a cornered animal. The other agents piled out of the car, and in a flurry of motion, they bundled the struggling Nazi into the back seat and onto the floor, throwing a blanket over him. The entire abduction had taken less than a minute. The car sped away from Garibaldi Street and disappeared into the night. They drove to a secure safe house that the Mossad had rented on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. They took Eichmann inside, stripped him of his clothes to search for weapons or poison capsules, and chained him by his ankle to a metal bed frame. He was terrified, convinced he was about to be executed. For the next 9 days, this small house would be his prison, his world reduced to a single room, and the presence of his Israeli captors. The psychological dynamic was extraordinary. These men, many of whom had lost their entire families to the system Eichmann had administered, now had total power over him, yet they treated him with a cold professionalism. They fed him, allowed him to wash, and spoke to him respectfully. This was not about revenge, it was about justice. Zvi Aharoni, the German-speaking interrogator, began the questioning. At first, Eichmann stuck to his alias. "I am Ricardo Klement." Aharoni was patient. He presented Eichmann with evidence of his true identity, details from his life that only he would know. Finally, Aharoni stated Eichmann's Nazi party number and his SS number from memory. Eichmann fell silent. He looked at his interrogator, and after a long pause, he admitted the truth in German. "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann." I am Adolf Eichmann. He then went further, confessing his true name and accepting that he was in the hands of Israelis. With his identity confirmed from his own lips, he was made to sign a document stating he was willing to travel to Israel to stand trial for his crimes. Whether this was truly voluntary is, of course, a matter of debate, but it was a crucial piece of legal cover for what was to come. Getting Eichmann into the safe house was only half the battle. Getting him out of Argentina would be even more difficult. The country's airports and borders were on high alert after his disappearance was reported. A private jet was too risky. The solution came in the form of a diplomatic flight. Israel had sent a delegation on an El Al Bristol Britannia aircraft to Buenos Aires to participate in Argentina's 150th anniversary of independence. This official flight provided the perfect cover. The Mossad team would smuggle Eichmann aboard as part of the flight crew. The plan was audacious. A Mossad doctor sedated Eichmann, not enough to make him unconscious, but enough to make him appear drunk or ill. They dressed him in an El Al flight attendant's uniform. His forged papers identified him as a crew member who had suffered a head injury in an accident a few days prior. On May 20th, the team drove him to Ezeiza International Airport. The tension was almost unbearable. They had to pass through multiple checkpoints. Rafi Eaton, the cool-headed commander, led the way, confidently explaining to the Argentinian officials that their colleague was unwell. At the final passport control, the official looked at the drugged, glassy-eyed Eichmann, then at his papers, then back at him. After a heart-stopping moment, he stamped the passport and waved them through. They walked him onto the tarmac, up the stairs of the Britannia, and sat him in a first-class seat. When the plane's doors finally closed and it began to taxi down the runway, a wave of relief washed over the team. As they cleared Argentinian airspace, Isser Harral, who was personally overseeing the exfiltration from the cockpit, sent a coded message to Prime Minister Ben-Gurion in Israel. The message was simple and chilling. The creature is in the cage. On May 23, 1960, David Ben-Gurion stood before the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and made an electrifying announcement that stunned the world. He revealed that Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the final solution, was in Israeli custody and would stand trial for his crimes against the Jewish people and against humanity. The news reverberated across the globe. There was jubilation in Israel and among Jewish communities worldwide, but there was also an immediate and fierce diplomatic backlash. Argentina, furious at the flagrant violation of its national sovereignty, lodged a formal protest with the United Nations. The debate over the legality of the abduction, a state-sponsored kidnapping, raged for months. Israel argued that the unique nature of Eichmann's crimes and the failure of the post-war world to bring him to justice created a moral imperative that superseded diplomatic protocol. Ultimately, the controversy subsided, and the world's attention turned to the impending trial in Jerusalem. The trial of Adolf Eichmann, which began in April 1961, was unlike any legal proceeding that had come before it. Its purpose, as stated by Ben-Gurion, was not only to bring one man to justice, but to educate a new generation. It was designed to be a public testament, a comprehensive, televised history lesson on the Holocaust, told through the voices of its victims. For the first time, Holocaust survivors, who had often been silent about their experiences, were given a global stage. The Israeli government built a special courtroom, and at its center was a specially constructed bulletproof glass booth where the defendant would sit, a stark, unforgettable image of a man both caged and isolated from the humanity he had sought to destroy. The prosecution was led by Israel's Attorney General, Gideon Hausner. His strategy was monumental. He called over 100 witnesses. These were not legal experts or historians. They were ordinary people, men and women who had survived the ghettos, the death camps, and the gas chambers. One by one, they took the stand and told their stories. They spoke of the families they had lost, the horrors they had witnessed. Their testimony was raw, powerful, and utterly devastating. The world watched, mesmerized. The trial transformed the Holocaust from an abstract historical event, a matter of incomprehensible statistics, into a tangible human tragedy. It was a national catharsis for Israel and a profound education for the world. Inside his glass booth, Eichmann watched the proceedings with a detached, bureaucratic air. His defense, put forward by his German lawyer, was simple and has since become infamous. He claimed he was not an ideologue driven by hatred, but a minor functionary, a cog in a vast machine. He argued that he was simply following orders. The classic Nuremberg defense of Befehl, ist Befehl. He portrayed himself as a man who had no choice, whose job was merely to organize transportation. He pleaded not guilty in the sense of the indictment, attempting to draw a line between his administrative actions and the mass murder they enabled. It was during this trial that the political theorist Hannah Arendt, covering it for The New Yorker, would coin her famous phrase to describe him: the banality of evil. She saw in Eichmann not a diabolical monster, but something almost more disturbing, a profoundly ordinary man whose signal characteristic was a complete and utter lack of imagination. an inability to think from the perspective of others, which allowed him to commit monstrous acts with a clear conscience. The trial lasted for months, but the verdict was never in doubt. The judges rejected his defense completely, ruling that he was a key and willing participant in the genocide. A man who acted with fanatical zeal. In December 1961, Adolf Eichmann was found guilty of crimes against the Jewish people, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. He was sentenced to death. After his appeals were exhausted, he was executed by hanging shortly after midnight on June 1, 1962. He remained defiant to the end. His last words reportedly included a declaration of loyalty to Germany, Argentina, and Austria, and a chillingly unrepentant final statement: "Long live Germany. Long live Argentina. Long live Austria. These are the three countries with which I have been most connected and which I will not forget. I greet my wife, my family, and my friends. I am ready. We'll meet again soon. As is the fate of all men, I have lived believing in God, and I die believing in God." His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over the Mediterranean Sea, outside Israeli territorial waters, ensuring that no grave would ever exist to become a shrine for his followers. The hunt for Adolf Eichmann was a landmark event of the 20th century. It was a spy thriller, a legal drama, and a profound moral reckoning all at once. The ultimate outcome was clear. A mass murderer was held accountable for his crimes. But when we dissect the anatomy of this global manhunt, we find that its true significance lies not just in the capture of one man, but in the complex convergence of memory, courage, and justice that made it possible. This was not the work of a single government or a single organization. It was the culmination of a decade and a half of refusal to forget. The anatomy of this success began with the stubborn memory of survivors like Simon Wiesenthal, who kept the names of the guilty from being erased by time. It was built on the singular moral courage of a German prosecutor, Fritz Bauer, a man who risked a charge of treason against his own country because he believed in a justice that transcended national borders. And it was executed through the meticulous, audacious, and brilliantly planned intelligence operation of the Mossad, a mission that demonstrated the fierce determination of a new nation to avenge its deepest trauma. The operation itself was a masterclass in tradecraft, from the painstaking surveillance on a dusty street in Buenos Aires to the daring exfiltration on a diplomatic flight. But perhaps the most important element of this story's anatomy is the trial itself. By placing Eichmann in that glass booth, Israel did more than put a man on trial. It put history in the witness box. The televised testimony of over 100 survivors transformed the global understanding of the Holocaust, searing its human cost into the world's consciousness. The hunt for Eichmann proved that there is no statute of limitations on genocide. It established a powerful precedent that those who commit crimes against humanity can be pursued to the ends of the earth for as long as it takes. It was a declaration that sovereignty is not a shield for monsters, and that the quiet, banal life of a factory foreman cannot wash away the blood of millions. The capture of Adolf Eichmann did not just close a dark chapter of the past. It was an act of historical reclamation, a promise to the 6 million dead that they would not be forgotten, and a warning to the world that the most horrific of evils are often carried out not by rabid fanatics, but by ordinary men sitting at ordinary desks. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.